Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk about the most thematically complex and controversial fantasy story I have ever read, and that is none other than Clive Barker's Imajica. Now this book is huge, and I mean that in page count, but more so in scope. What Barker set out to accomplish with this is incredibly ambitious, and I think a lot of it is absolutely brilliant, but it is not short of flaws either, and we're going to get into both of those. So in essence, what this story is a retelling of the Judeo-Christian Abrahamic faith of the Western world, and Barker uses subversions to both that mythology, to storytelling structure, and then injects a ton of extremely dark fantasy elements to make not an escapist novel, but a rather confrontational one, which is quite unique, and I really appreciated the way he went about this. So let's just get into what is this book about. And like I said, it's complex. This is a difficult book to really describe. But what we have here is the Imajica. And the Imajica is all of existence. And the Imajica is split into 5 dominions. Now, these dominions are parallel worlds, and I mean that in the literal sense, to where they have their own inhabitants and flora and fauna and kind of what we expect in a fantasy story. However, they're also parallel in a metaphysical sense, in the way that they influence our characters as they're there and kind of change their motivations and their perspectives on how they interact with one another and the world around them. Now, 4 of these dominions are reconciled, which means they are intertwined, they are connected. You can quite easily travel between them. Where they begin and end isn't necessarily clear, but doesn't necessarily matter for the story. Now, the 5th dominion is where we reside, on Earth. Now, Earth is not reconciled with the other 4. And even though there's been attempts in the past to do so, it is being prevented by the primary villain of this story. And the villain is none other than God. And God, under the name Hypexamendios, has, for a slew of different malevolent reasons, to where he's trying to prevent the unification of both heaven and earth, and also separate the other 4 dominions that are currently reconciled together. Now, he is assisted by a group called the Tabula Rasa. Now, the Tabula Rasa has this kind of ancient conspiracy, underworld, Illuminati kind of thing going on with them, to where they're not only just trying to assist him when preventing the reconciliation of the Imajica, but also ridding our world full of magic or any knowledge that the Imajica even exists. It was very well done. I quite enjoyed reading about them. So we follow 3 main characters in this story. Now, the primary is a man named John Fury Zacharias, also known as Gentle. Now, Gentle's goal in this story is to basically to destroy God and to reconcile the 5 dominions. Now, Gentle, he is the Christ figure. He is the Messiah of this story. But in order for him to reconcile the Imajica, he must first reconcile himself. And that is what this book is really about. It's an exploration of a swath of different themes through the eyes of our main character, Gentle. He is tested, and one kind of overarching theme of this entire book, or I would say the main one, is the reunification of subdivided components, whether that be in our personal lives or the world around us. Now, the 2 other characters in the story, we have Judith, a woman who is the first counterpoint to Gentle's journey, and you have Pi O Pa. Now, Pi O Pa is quite interesting. He is this androgynous, shape-shifting entity who can appear as the desire of whoever is looking upon him. So I'm sure you can assume that there are some massive thematic consequences of having somebody like that in your story. And I said a second ago that Judith was a counterpoint to Gentle, and Pi is as well. So they're going to help challenge Gentle through his journey through 2 different perspectives. So Pi is Gentle's chance at redemption and to becoming whole and to find the good in himself and the world. Okay. And then Judith, on the other hand, is the exploration of the dark side of Gentle as we experience him in this story, but then also in his path. Now, they have other components to them that are important, which I'll get into in a moment. So I keep saying a reunification. Well, Barker uses a line in this book that says all pieces, whether born or made, are waiting to be whole again. And that's what we are trying to witness with Gentle. And he's able to do this in a bunch of different ways. So we have an exploration of both sexuality and love and identity and just what makes you, even on a spiritual sense, a metaphysical sense. I mean, there's just so much dense material that can be interpreted 100 different ways. And I think Barker does a great job of making it happen. So let's just kind of get into some of the pros and cons of this book. Now, the first one I want to bring up, I think is kind of falls into both categories, which is his prose, right? He is a beautiful prose writer. When there is conversations about, fantasy authors with very good, eloquent prose, the fact that there is an omission of Clive Barker in that conversation is absolutely ludicrous because this guy can write a beautiful passage like nobody else. However, there is such a large amount of density in the writing when you're dealing with a book that is this size. I mean, this is like Stormlight Archive or The Stand. This is your plus 1,000-page epic huge tome. Sometimes it can feel a little weighty. I don't think he has purple prose per se, but he gets as close as humanly possible to that without falling over the edge. I appreciated this, but if you're looking for something that you can just kind of breeze through, a quick light story, this is not it. This took me a couple weeks to get through, and I think the prose had a lot to do with that. And it often had me going back and reading certain passages or sections of the book because some of the things weren't clear just on the lyrical nature of how he wrote the story. Okay, so going on from there, another thing, and you might catch a theme on this, that he does that I would say is both a positive and then also a negative, is just how bold he is in some of his statements. I mentioned before that this is a confrontational reading experience, and it really is, because as you follow Gentle and he's tested and he's having to interact with these kind of larger ideas of, sexuality and identity and everything else, Barker is putting him in scenes that are extremely dark, extremely, I would just say, vulgar or kind of over the top, which is going to invoke a reaction out of you if you're reading this. It's incredibly intentional. It's very obvious that that's what he's trying to do. He wants you to think about these things. And you're either going to have a reaction or you have a high tolerance for these, and you're going to be able to step back and you say, okay, well, this is what we're kind of exploring here. It might be thought-provoking. It might not. That's up for you. But if you don't have a high tolerance, you're not used to something like this, it's going to be shocking. And at times it could be grotesque. And it could take you out of it or compromise the reading experience. And I have certainly seen that for some people that have read this. Some examples here is this book is highly sexualized, and I'm not talking about like a scene here or there. There is borderline pornographic material through this entire novel. I have a high tolerance for stuff like that. It didn't really bother me. I felt like there was a purpose to it. It wasn't just for shock value. Barker is often trying to articulate certain metaphysical concepts using things like that to illustrate like a kind of an objective experience to where you can get the point across, which is a difficult thing to do. And his choice was to use sexuality as the kind of vessel to explore these ideas. That's not for everybody, but I think the way it was done was very, very good. And at times, when I first kind of started reading this, I was like, whoa, this is kind of next level. But I was able to step back and say, oh, I get it. This is what he's trying to do. And it kind of clicked for me. And through the rest of the novel, it was a non-issue. But like I said, kind of a pro, kind of a con because he took some huge risks on this book, and I have a lot of respect for that. But some people won't be thrilled with it. So another thing I want to point out to this book is it is split into two parts. Now, the first part, you kind of feel a little disjointed at times, because so much of this book are these big, grand, overarching themes that until you have a good concept of what he's trying to accomplish here, the first half of the novel, you kind of don't know what's going on. There's still like typical plot progression in the sense that you're kind of used to, but you don't understand like the characters' motivations. Sometimes they know things that they shouldn't know. And it can almost come across like the writing is poor. But then once you get to the second half of the book and everything kind of starts like falling into place, it's like, okay, I get it now. This is absolutely brilliant, or at least that was my takeaway. So just something to be aware of if you pick up this book. Just let yourself go through the experience and it will all come together in the end. You just need to trust him that he's going to take you there. And he does. So all in all, I thought this was a great book. I've had a little bit of difficult time assigning a rating to it. I didn't know at first, was this a 3-star read, 5-star read, 1-star read? There's just so much here. And using a typical metric that I would assign to another novel is difficult because, when we have a typical fantasy book, what you're primarily focusing on is your plot and your characters. And you might have a preference on what you prefer, but that's kind of, that's the initial benchmark. And then we follow it up with like world building and magic and then lore and mythology. Now, this is a complete inverse of that structure, to where the mythology and the lore is the primary driver of the story, followed about like the kind of thematic elements that he's presenting here, and then everything else falls in that sequence. So I really had to ask myself, is this a book I'm going to reread? And undoubtedly, yes, 100%. I think there is so much to still unpack that now that I really have a true understanding of what the authorial intent is with this book, I'm sure going back and reading this again is going to be an absolute joy. And the people who are quite fond of this book, that's what I've heard them say. It's often compared to books like kind of Book of the New Sun or Gene Wolfe, to where it takes a little time to get acclimated. And then once you do, every time you go back to it, you love it more and more and more and more. And I think that's probably going to be the case for this for me. Anyway, if you made it to the end here, thank you. I appreciate your time. And if you've read Imajica, let me know what you think about it. If you want to pick it up in the future, I'd love to chat with you about it then. But until next time, see ya.